Thank you so much. And I try to promise not to stop everyone from having lunch on time. So that's the goal, remind me. Thank you so much for the organizers for giving me this opportunity to share a little bit more about this work. As Beth said, my name is Emmy Tsang. I am the engagement lead at Invested Open Infrastructure. And I would like to blame my following 20 minutes of rambling on jet lag, but I actually am based in Utrecht, Netherlands. So there's no excuse. But I'll try and keep it concise and short. So we'll start with a little bit of an outline on what IOI, Invest in Open Infrastructure, is, our mission, and the core programs that we have. And then share a little bit about our approach to this sort of regional exploration, we're calling it, and the key findings from there. I think I can actually skim quite a bit on the detail because Risa's study has been so much more comprehensive, but hopefully also shed light on how this exploration has been important to us as an organization and what impact it has had almost immediately on a lot of our work. All right. So, at Invested Open Infrastructure, our mission is working towards increasing investment and the adoption of open infrastructure to further the equitable access and participation to research. So really, this is grounded in understanding that, again, resonating with the keynote that we've heard this morning, in order for open knowledge to flourish, our system needs to be similarly designed. And so we really are looking at how our work can be pushing towards and advancing that vision of open infrastructure being the default in research and scholarship. We have a sort of three-pronged approach. We do research on specifically, as an example, the broader funding trends and gaps in the open infrastructure ecosystem. The piece that I will present is also part of our research. We also then hope to turn that research into actionable resources and guidance for stakeholders in the space, like funders and budget holders, to help them make informed decisions about their investment and adoption of open infrastructure. And then last but not least, we know that there's no action without stakeholders and coordination. So that's what we also try to do. We try to bring together folks to pilot different alternative mechanisms that we think may potentially change something in this space. So what the three-pronged approach sort of look like in practice, this is actually our three core programs for this year as an illustration of that approach. So again, bringing us back to this mission of increasing investment in and adoption of open infrastructure. Our first part of our core program is what we're calling the IOI 2024 Fund. So this is really looking at building a fund that would not only catalyze, bring in a larger amount of catalytic capital to this sort of systemically underfunded space of open infrastructure, but also looking at how we can use this as an effort to diversify the funders that are in this space. Can we look beyond the usual suspects that have always been supporting this space, right? What does that look like, and how do we work with various partners in this ecosystem to really achieve as much effect as possible? And then the second pillar is what we're calling the data room, which is we're envisioning a toolbox of tools for decision makers, budget holders, funders, and others in the space who are looking to make decisions about which open infrastructures to fund, invest in, and adopt. So one of these tools, the flagship, I would say, at the moment is the Catalog of Open Infrastructure Services, which I will also speak a little bit more about later and hope that you will ask me questions about. And the last pillar, the last program of our work at the moment is what we're calling strategic support. So this is really turning our sort of deep base of research that we've been doing for the past couple of years into actionable guidance by working specifically with very specific partners. So I'll give you an example, which is that we're currently working with Archive, the high-energy preprint server, to help them use our research to improve their governance and sustainability. And so this is really where we're looking at having tailored applications of that research so that we can also improve our understanding and the knowledge itself in terms of how we can improve the health of the open infrastructure ecosystem. Okay, so Now switching gears into talking about specifically the regional exploratory research. I would say very honestly, the motivation for this work has really been sort of a point of collective deep reflection within the team. So we've realized that in the past, more or less since the founding of IOI in 2018, a lot of the conversations and a lot of the voices that we've been hearing and bringing in are very much centered within North America and Europe. And we're starting to realize that, I think there's an understanding that open infrastructure needs to be a global conversation. And there's a lot of value in bringing together diverse stakeholders from diverse geographical areas and learning from each other. But we've not been able to put dedicated focus on it until, I would say, the beginning of this sort of effort to really deepen our understanding into the initiatives, people, and issues involved in scholarly communications in these areas that we've not really been present and listening to. So I should also acknowledge the team that actually did the work. So the research team, Anne Britton, Tanya Hernandez-Ortiz, and Naomi Penfold, 3 researchers from our research team who carried out this work. I also, you might have noted on the slide here, that there's a little bit of bracket around Asia, while we're actually mostly talking about India, and I'll explain that in a second. So some of the key research questions that we really want to understand further is these 3 on the screen. So what are the characteristics of open infrastructure serving India, Africa, and Latin America? What are the strengths, opportunities, weaknesses, and threats that they face? And then what are some of the funding needs in terms of open infrastructures in these regions? So I think this is where it really contrasted with Risa's approach. I think as a sort of nonprofit initiative in the space, with a small team, we have a much more sort of mixed method, if you will, in terms of deepening that understanding. So this process started off with a little bit of desk research. Actually, each of the researchers took up a region. So initially it was Latin America, Asia, and Africa. They went in and just sort of used the internet to the best of their abilities, and then realized that there's too much information. So they then said, okay, why don't we just focus on one country within each of those regions? So I think what we picked was Ghana in Africa, Buenos Aires in Latin America, and India in Asia. And then did more desk research, and then when the team reconvened, realized that actually, particularly in Africa and in Latin America, there's a very interconnected network when it comes to thinking about open infrastructure, and it's really hard to isolate the countries on their own. So then that resulted in sort of this Latin America, Africa, and India, because in those particular cases, it's been almost impossible to kind of just say, okay, this is what's happening in this country, and not consider the rest of the continent. So that's a little bit of the journey there. So as you can see, there's a little bit of switch in approaches during the process itself. That is, I think, strictly speaking, around 4 months of research. We did also conduct, from the desk research, identified participants to conduct semi-structured interviews, 21 of them, in English and Spanish, depending on the region and the participants' preferred language. And then also at the same time during this period, we, with the engagement team that I'm leading, were going to events in these places, and that contributed to additional insights as we, seek to gain this understanding. So we were in, for example, the West and Central Africa Research and Education Network, so WACRAN's annual conference in Ghana in March, as well as Open Repositories in South Africa, and in CSVConf in Buenos Aires in April. So there's definitely been influences from those conversations coming into these findings that I'm about to present. In terms of the participants that were participating in this work, there were not only infrastructure providers that we're looking to hear from, but also experts in open research and knowledge, as well as funders and people who are providing leadership and services in academic institutions. Would not head into this work without pointing out some of the limitations that we have. It is a very short project, and I think one of the things that, again, would love to sort of have deeper conversations on about is, I think the research team themselves are realizing a lot of how our own biases and perspectives are coming into play as we, analyze and listen to folks. And so we felt that it was important to address this, but also knowing that this is very much an exploration with a small number of participants, the findings that I'm about to present will reflect mostly of the cases that we specifically discussed with these interviewees. So what did we hear from interviewees about? I think Jim mentioned in the opening that internet connectivity is something that has been crucially important when you think about open research and access to knowledge. So we heard a lot of that from our interviewees, unsurprisingly, as well as repositories. I think Risa talked a lot about. But we also heard them talking about publishing tools and software, journal indexing services. In Africa in particular, we heard about virtual learning technologies as they moved into COVID and having to navigate that with the rest of the world. And social infrastructure. So this was not mentioned as social infrastructure, but a lot of interviewees were reflecting on the kind of technical expertise and capacity that are needed to maintain, develop, and implement open infrastructure. So as well as communities that are important as well. So we definitely heard a lot of that. I'm not going to go through all of this because time, but I welcome questions, so I'll just pick a couple of points to highlight. I think what has really been a bright spot from this series of interviews is there is a very strong sort of ingrained value of openness and equity within a lot of these regions. An interview said openness is in our DNA, and so that really is a really encouraging thing to hear and to see when we consider this open infrastructure movement, if you will, within those regions, as well as that strong recognition of the value of collaboration partnerships. People are very aware of what it means to collaborate with each other and the value and benefits that provide. So that was also very clear across a lot of the interviews. Some of the threats and weaknesses, again, I think Risa's talked much more extensively about all of those things. But the weak political stability, which means that when you have a new government, which happens all the time in these regions, the existing sort of initiatives and commitments tend to not be followed on. And so it's really hard for infrastructure to find stability and sustainability amongst this sort of political climate. There's also disconnects in governments and practitioners and communities that we've heard about in terms of one that stuck in my brain was that an interviewee said it's much easier to get governments to invest in actually repainting buildings for universities, for example, but much harder to get them to focus on building cables for connectivity. So there's still this sort of disconnect in recognizing the importance of digital infrastructure in enabling research and scholarship. And then we actually asked the question to most interviewees of, what would you do if you have $50 million US? So these are some of the opportunities that we have heard about. I think the main thing here is really the recognition that there needs to be additional investment to strengthen the operational capacity of open infrastructures. So thinking about not only paid staff to maintain repository systems and journals, but also ensuring that they have the capacity and the skills to do so. Resourcing for technical systems, technical upgrades and maintenance. We've heard, DSpace upgrade, the DSpace 7 upgrade has been a sort of barrier for a lot of folks, and the need for additional investments for that to happen so that, the system could remain secure and robust. And what I will pick one more from here, which is that countries are not homogeneous, they're heterogeneous, and I was personally very glad to hear that highlighted. There were interviewees who said, we really think that additional investment and support should really be concentrated on those at the periphery. So for example, how do you build last mile connectivity to rural areas, knowing that in those cases, commercial providers usually don't do those things because it just is not profitable, right? So that gap is one that is really hard to fill, and interviewees have wished to see more investments in those cases. So yeah, I think the key takeaway in one sentence is that we understood a lot about the heterogeneity that lies within the individual regions and the countries, and even within the regions of the countries. But also seeing that there are lots of actually shared challenges, not only within the regions that we've studied here, but also with the conversations that we've heard in the North America and Europe. Actually, there's a lot of opportunities where we can share some of those learnings and try and maybe figure out how to build solutions together. So I said that I was going to discuss how this has influenced our work, and so I'm going to try and do a little bit of that, focusing first on a fund that we actually have launched earlier this year, so in May. So it's what I would say here is it's extremely empowering to be in a position to be able to sort of take that research directly and say, okay, these are the areas that we've heard has been sort of underfunded and need additional investment. We're going to just invest in those directly. So we started running this fund actually end of last year, but really formalized the sort of public call for proposal in May, specifically funding around the 3 areas that I've just talked about in the opportunity section: capacity building, strengthening community governance, and critical shared infrastructure in terms of thinking about interoperability. We've also, partially informed by the findings of this research, specifically decided to build a 60% carve-out specifically for low and middle income economies, so projects that are serving communities in these countries or are applied. The applicants are based in these countries. So the deadline for the call for proposal is over. I know some of the applicants probably are sitting in this room, but I would say we have a pot of, for this fund, we have a pot of $130,000, which is not a lot, but we got close to 200 proposals, including from 51 countries, including 31 low and middle income economies. So I hope this is a loud and clear call for funders sitting out there who, can look at this and say, this is really an area that is just, there's so much opportunity if we have additional investments. And I will also say that all the proposals are openly available online. So if you want to check out some of those cool ideas and understand the impact that additional investment can make, you can do so directly. The other way that this has really impacted our work is in how we are engaging with the broader community. So there's a QR code on the slide. You can find out more about how we're approaching working with networks from our latest blog post. But the idea really is sort of a limitation that we've seen as we did this work, is that there are so many communities and networks out there, library consortia, NRENs, that have been working for decades with local communities to really deeply understand their need and to build that trust and relationship. And so if we are looking to have an impact, to make a change towards driving investment in an adoption of open infrastructure, we need to be working with these networks hand in hand. And so part of the very concrete way that this is manifested is that in the fund that we're building next year, we're looking at partnering with networks as an implementation partner. So we raise the fund and then we give it to them. They decide how best to spend it. So that's something that we're working towards. And again, lots of room for questions there. If you want to catch me privately later, I'm happy to answer them as well, to the best of my ability. And then final slide. As I mentioned, we're building tools for decision makers. So this is our flagship, the Catalog of Open Infrastructure Services, which we've launched a prototype for in January last year. We're about to launch version 2 at the end of this year with 70 infrastructure services. And in building this tool, we're really thinking deeply about how we can ensure that this is a tool that can meet the needs of stakeholders from all around the world, not only the ones that we've heard a lot from. So I think this is, for me personally, about how we embed what we've learned within this process of doing this regional research in the design of a product. How do we make sure that the connections that we've built, the voices that we've heard, and the ones that we haven't heard within the communities are involved in the user research and the testing and the design of this tool, basically, and all the other tools that we hopefully will build. So there's a lot of sort of scaffolding, structural work that is being done behind the scenes. Again, happy to talk more later if you're interested, but this is something that we're really, really excited about and really hope that it will become something that everyone can rely upon and be useful to their work. Thank you very much, and my email address is on the screen if you want to email.
Okay, we have about 6 minutes for questions. Yes, please.
Thank you very much for your excellent presentations. So interesting, some of the themes that you highlighted. And one of them that really stood out for me was that you both talked about Asia in different ways, and in terms of the networks that do or don't exist and opportunities that people have to collaborate. I'd like to hear a little bit more about your thoughts about what are the things that have made networks in Africa and Latin America work so well and be so strong, and what can we take from those examples and help improve the situation across Asia, particularly the ASEAN.
Just kidding. So yeah, works of the networks in probably from the region. As I've mentioned, I just studied one country per place, so it's like I felt it's not adequate to talk about them. But when it comes to networks, as I believe, each country has their own, that's their strength, that they have their own networks to work with. So let's say, for example, my classic example is Myanmar. As far as I know, in Asia, and I think in the Pacific, there's an advocacy for open science, but they are not yet heard too much. As I've mentioned, my suggestion would probably be to strengthen. I don't know if I would answer it correctly. For say, for example, for Southeast Asia, it's more still of opening discussions, because I believe they are unique. It's like I would rather go back to the basic understanding that we wanted to go into this shared understanding of diverse paths. So it's still very broad, but I'm so afraid to discuss deeper, because like I only have one representative per country, but it's more of like opening on the level of discussions of like how exactly their problems are, and for and one thing that I wanted to highlight is like what are really, one thing that came to my mind when I'm looking into these studies I had was that there's a level of resistance from these countries that hamper them. If that could be one issue that could be looked into, or probably my bias is that I always look into the knowledge, the contextual knowledge of each group or every region or every country. So I thought like that could be part of the discussion that would be significant. I need to give the floor to you too.
Yeah, I would say lots of personal opinion here from my interactions with various folks in the network, so can't speak for them. But what I've observed is I've pointed out the fact that they really appreciate and understand the value of collaboration and working together. And I would go even stretch that to say not only the value and benefits, but the need for it, right? The urgency, realizing that they all face a common challenge and that unless they bond together and they work together, they're not going to overcome it. So I think like sort of from an outsider's perspective, observing and listening to them, that's something that's really come through.
Maybe one more question. Yes, Patrick.
This is more a quicker one about the catalog. I just looked it up. There are 10 open infrastructures, but you got applications from 192, if I remember, called the open infrastructures for funding. Have you thought about combining these processes so that if they're applying, they're already in the catalog?
That's a great idea. I mean, I wish we could do that. We're definitely looking at the funding applications that we have to help inform kind of who we work with and sort of what we add to the catalog. I'd say the funding application itself, as you can imagine, is quite different from the information that we're looking to collect for the catalog, so there's a little bit of bridging needed there. But we are definitely excited to work with the folks who are applied and indicated that interest to have more visibility and really showcase their work to see how, you know, the catalog can be designed for that purpose. So something that we're thinking very deeply about.
Hey, how about one more round of applause for our presenter?
Okay, it's 12 o'clock. Thank you. Thank you also. Lunch is being served just outside, and at 12:15 there will be 2 people from the library to pick you up for the tour. You will recognize them. They wear company clothing. So enjoy the lunch.